He gave the door a gentle push with the toe of his boot, and it swung open with a creak. The room was dark, cloaked in shadows, but Alesh caught a metallic flickering in the gloom and recoiled just in time to avoid the questing steel as it cut through the space where his throat had been a moment before. Alesh countered, his blade lashing forward, and was rewarded with the feel of it piercing flesh, though the darkness made it impossible to tell exactly where it had struck. There was a growl of anger from the shadows, and Alesh grunted in surprise as the man charged into him, slamming him into the wall. Alesh scrambled, catching the man's wrists more by luck than design in an effort to keep the glimmering steel at bay. It was a near thing at first, the man's momentum and Alesh's surprise working together, and Alesh managed to stop the blade only inches from his face. They struggled then, and after a moment Alesh noted that his adversary was growing weaker as the wound robbed him of his strength. His attacker must have realized this too. He jerked his hand back only to lunge forward again in an attempt to surprise Alesh, but the wound had stolen not just his strength but his speed as well, and Alesh managed to parry the flashing blade, knocking it out of the man's hand before countering with an attack of his own. The man's body stiffened as the sword went in, and warm blood covered Alesh's hand and wrist. His opponent let out a soft moan and collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Alesh stood there, panting, and was still trying to get his breath back when one of Captain Nordin's men came rushing up from behind him, holding a lantern. "Chosen?" he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Alesh managed. And on the surface, at least, that was true, for the man's knife had managed only superficial cuts along his arms. Painful, but too shallow to be of any real danger. Then the guard raised the lantern he carried, its poor light shining down, and Alesh saw his opponent for the first time. A short, grey-haired man that looked to be in his 60s, his clothes marking him as a chamberlain or head of servants. The man's face was slack in death, and he looked almost peaceful, like some kindly grandfather who, exhausted from playing with his well-loved grandchildren, had lain down for a brief nap to regather his strength. The sort of grandfather who would make jokes and tell his grandchildren stories about how things used to be and about how good they had it. Alesh decided maybe he'd spoken too soon, after all. Maybe he wasn't fine. In fact, he was beginning to think he wasn't even close. "Very well." The guard nodded, moving farther into the house, his own blade ready. Alesh watched him go, taking a slow, deep breath. They had been at it for days now, hunting down the nobles and merchants of the city who had been in secret league with Aldrich and the Darkness, intent on betraying Alesh and the city of Valeria to the enemy. And the dead man lying at his feet wasn't the first warrior he'd slain who seemed to have no business being mixed up in such bloody affairs. Though he had suffered no significant physical wounds, Alesh felt that his emotions and mental state had taken a beating over the past days, as he and the others rooted out the servants of the Darkness in the city, each seemingly a more unlikely candidate than the last. He did his best to hide the emotional toll the work took, just as he did his best to conceal the shame it left in him. After all, he had promised the nobles justice. He'd told them that those guilty of treason would be hunted down, a job made easier by documents found in the recently deceased Lord Aldrich's mansion, documents cataloguing in detail the activities of his fellow conspirators, presumably a safeguard against any of them betraying him. Alesh knew the work was important, vital even, but knowing that did not change the guilt festering inside him. For the old man lying dead at his feet was not the first he had killed while tracking down the traitors to Valeria. It was becoming so bad that he had considered doing as Catherine had recommended and leaving the work to Nordin and his men. After all, she'd said, leaders had a responsibility not to risk themselves at tasks others were better suited for. But Alesh could not do that. He might not be a good leader, but he told himself he would not be the kind of man to ask his subordinates do something he was unwilling to do himself. So he woke each morning, or roused himself from a night spent tossing and turning with nightmares in which he saw all the faces of those he'd slain, and met with Captain Nordin to see what dark truths the scribes studying the reams of Aldrich's files had uncovered.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it. at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.